Welcome to Awareness, everyone. 60 years ago in segregated Washington, D.C., where the nation's capital was bracing for the first and biggest national protest against racial inequality, it was happening. The March on Washington. In fact, because of the unknown, the Kennedy administration didn't even want the march to happen because they just didn't know what to expect. Was it going to turn into a bloodbath? Was it going to remain peaceful? In fact, members of the military were suited up and on standby just in case havoc was to break out on the National Mall. One of those men joining us in studio today, civil rights activist and Sumter County native James Felder. Thank you so much for coming to the show, Mr. Felder.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate your insight on what is 60 years of a reflection of the March on Washington. Before we get into that, we're going to talk about that later in the show. I want our viewers to become familiar with you and how you walked into the world of the civil rights movement as a young man from Sumter, South Carolina.
It all started in Sumter, South Carolina at Mount Pisgah AME Church. Jim Clyburn and I were members of the Youth Council of the NAACP, which was based in that church. Reverend Fred James was the pastor who later became a bishop. And he was elected, Jim Clyburn was elected president, I was elected vice president. That's what was the beginning of our political career. From that point on, I went to Clark College in Atlanta, was elected president of the Student Government Association, and when the sit-in started in 1960, I had to lead the march in Atlanta along with Dr. King, the first march that we did in March 1960.
Wow.
From
so
there,
you worked with Dr. King.
Marched with Dr. King.
In 1960.
1960. Matter of fact, he just moved back to Atlanta from Montgomery. We all got together, the 6 schools in the Atlanta University system, and combined our efforts for a march in Atlanta. Someone said, Dr. King just moved back, let's ask him to join us.
Yeah.
Made a phone call, got an appointment at his office at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and we went over that afternoon. And what was supposed to be 30 minutes ended up being about a 2-hour conversation with Dr. King.
Now, at the time, was he the Dr. King, the household name that we know today?
He was coming into that.
Okay.
You know, he'd been in Montgomery, the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks, but then he decided to move to Atlanta, a larger city, when he formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But we had to sit there for 2 hours and listen to a conversation with him. We stayed so long, we missed dinner back on campus. So he said, Coretta, I kept these children here so long, fix them something to eat. I don't remember what it was. What a college student, you just ate what was put in front of you.
Right.
So that was my beginning with Dr. King. And then he did march with us on that first march in Atlanta. His group marched on Macy's, what is now Macy's. It was Rich's department store at that time. My group, Julian Bond and myself, we led a group to the state capitol. They saw us coming, they locked the doors, so we marched around and then went back to campus. But Dr. King's group got arrested.
Wow. What were you marching for at that time?
Say again?
What were you marching for at that time?
We were lunch counters. We were trying to desegregate the lunch counters. We were trying to get merchants and restaurant owners to allow blacks to eat in those facilities and to work in those facilities as cashiers and so forth.
And that really ignited the fire within you to say,
Yes.
I have to be a part of change and for equal rights for people that look like me.
I got arrested several times. So I'm sitting in a courtroom in Atlanta, same courtroom now that Fannie Mae Willis is charging Trump with, watching Donald Hollowell, our lawyer, representing us. Donald Hollowell was to Georgia what Matthew Perry was to Columbia. And so I'm sitting there watching him argue and so forth, and that's when I said, I want to be like that guy.
I want you to fast forward to 1963. I mean, a year that was really on fire for the civil rights movement. A lot happening then.
Billie Jean, 63 was the pivotal year of the civil rights in this country. And it all began, there were highs and lows. It began on a very good high. January 1963, Harvey Gantt was admitted to Clemson. February 1963, the Kennedys had a big party at the White House and invited black folk for the first time. 1,000 black people were invited. Washington, D.C. was a segregated city. So most of those people couldn't even get into a hotel room or eat food at a restaurant.
Who all was invited?
In their cars. Say again?
Who all was invited?
Oh, gosh. Dr. King, he didn't come. Rudolph, Randolph didn't come. They were the architects of the civil rights of the March on Washington, but others did come. Jim Brown, Bill Cosby, Sammy Davis Jr., singers, entertainers, and they came. President invites you to the White House, you go, regardless of what the situation is. So you had the top crust of black people at that affair. March, Dr. King is in Birmingham, tearing up the place. April, he writes his speech from the Birmingham jail, which so many people need to read. May, you had the Children's Crusade. That's when elementary school children in Birmingham were out marching and demonstrating, and you saw the hoses knocking down people in the street and the dogs biting folk. That
those images, wow.
Images. Well, the Kennedys saw those images, and so in June, President Kennedy went on national television and made a great civil rights speech and offered some legislation to Congress. That same night when Kennedy finished, Medgar Evers was gunned down in his front yard with his family looking out of the window.
Wow.
That was June. And also in June, George Wallace stood in the door of the University of Alabama to stop 2 black students from entering. That was Wallace. Well, Medgar Evers was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. I handled that funeral. Then afterwards, I took Miss Evers to the White House for a repast. That was June. Now, July, nothing happened. Then come the 28th of August, 1963, with the big march on Washington, and I was there.
Wow, that is a great place to pause. When we return, okay, stay tuned. We're going to hear more from James Felder, firsthand knowledge of history. We'll be right back.